So let's get into it. We're going to jump right in. We're going to talk about animal protein. The reason we're going to start here is because this is probably where it's going to hurt the most. And animal protein is really the cause of a lot of inflammatory diseases. And so it's important that we tackle this right off the bat, right? So a lot of people always ask me, like, where am I going to get my protein from? And you are going to get your protein from plant foods. Plant foods have all 9 essential amino acids. And really, essential amino acids, essential, that word, as it relates to amino acids, it just means that we cannot make the amino acids. It means that we have to eat them, consume them in some way, shape, or form. Plants have all of those. Now, there's some plants that have more protein than others. They're just more dense in protein than others. But you look up any plant food, you're going to find that they have protein within them. You know, I often give the example of like the gorilla and the elephant, right? These are plant eating animals. And just look at how big they are, right? Like you don't see them wondering where they're going to get their protein from. So we definitely don't need to worry about that. All right, cool. So I have right here my phone, and I am going to read from Harvard's School of Public Health. And really, the question is, what is protein? Protein is found throughout the body, in the muscles, bone, skin, hair, and virtually every other body part or tissue. It makes up the enzymes that power the chemical reactions and the hemoglobin that carries oxygen in your blood. At least 10,000 different proteins make up what you are and keep you that way. Protein is made from 20 plus basic building blocks called amino acids. Because we don't store amino acids, our body makes them in 2 different ways, either from scratch or by modifying others, right? And we talked about this. There are 9 of them. So I definitely wanted to read that piece right there. There's another piece that I really want to read on this that I absolutely love. It says, it's all about the protein package. I might summarize this, but it says, when we eat foods or protein, we also eat everything that comes along with it. The different fats, fiber, sodium, and more. It's the protein package that's likely to make the difference in health. So now they begin to give some examples, and I just love this right here. A 4-ounce broiled sirloin steak is great, and it's a great source of protein, about 33 grams worth. But it also delivers, 5 grams of saturated fat, right? A 4-ounce ham steak with 22 grams of protein only has 1.6 grams of saturated fat, but it's loaded with 1,500 grams worth of sodium. Okay, okay. A 4-ounce grilled sockeye salmon has about 30 grams of protein, naturally low in sodium, and contains just 1 gram of saturated fat. Salmon and other fatty fish are also excellent sources for omega-3 fatty acids, a type of fat that is especially good for the heart. Now, it doesn't say this here, but you have to be careful also when eating fish because potential highs in mercury levels, but also it depends on where you get your fish from. So if you're eating farmed fish, just about as bad as animal, just regular animal protein, because they are also raised with a bunch of other fish, and so they get sick. They get pumped with antibiotics and all of that kind of stuff. The GMOs, it's just not good. We're going to talk about where one might be in their journey to health. If you don't have any chronic diseases, cool. Have your little thing here and there if you want to. However, I am going to tell you what's the best, and then you can decide where along the spectrum you are. Now, if you've already been diagnosed with a chronic disease, you want to stay away from all of it. You want to focus on whole food and a whole foods plant-based diet. Now I have one more. A cup of cooked lentils provides 18 grams of protein, 15 grams of fiber, and it virtually has no saturated fat or sodium. So when you're eating this food, cool, like I might say milk has calcium in it, right? But it also has a bunch of other things that aren't good for me, right? Especially like thinking about a little bit of pus, right? Um, the fat that's in there is also saturated, right? Milk is just, especially cow's milk, right? It's something that comes from a cow, is really meant for a baby cow to get bigger. And so when we eat it, it also has negative effects as well. So I say that to say, when you are taking in protein, you have to think about what else you're taking along with it. It's not worth it to say, I'm going to eat this thing because it has protein or it has vitamin D, or because you want to look at what other benefits do I get from eating this thing. I will get off my soapbox and I'll get into the other reasons why we should stay away from animal protein. One of the reasons why it's important to stay away from animal proteins is that when we consume animal proteins, uh, it stimulates insulin growth factor 1, IGF-1. And what that does is that it aids in cell division of normal cells and also cancerous cells. So, consuming animal proteins, this is one of the ways in which it contributes to the development of cancer. Consuming animal products also leads to increased phosphorus in our body, which leads to heart disease. When we consume animal protein, it produces an effect in the body that makes the body more acidic. And when the body becomes more acidic, what happens is that the bones release calcium in order to neutralize the acidity in the body. And when the bones release calcium from the bones, we end up with bone disease, osteoporosis. Fellas, when we eat a lot of animal protein, it decreases testosterone, right? And a lot of people think about like erectile dysfunction as something that, oh, I'll just take a Viagra for. The truth is, if you decrease the amount of animal protein that you're eating, chances are all of this will correct itself. Eating a lot of animal protein also damages the kidneys. I talked a little bit about the acidity that comes from eating animal proteins. And what happens is that because of that, it causes the kidneys to go into working overtime to release the acidity from the body. We wonder why, so many people are on dialysis. Well, it's because of the foods that we eat. Eating animal products also cause the body to release TMAO, trimethylene N oxide. And once this happens, it causes inflammation everywhere. And so we don't know what's going to show up when that happens. It just means the whole body is inflamed. That's another reason you want to stay away from animal proteins. The other thing that I think is really important to talk about is when we eat animal proteins, it affects our hormones. There have been studies that show that cortisol levels increase with the consumption of animal proteins. And so just think about all the different ways in which cortisol affects us. That also leads to inflammation as well. This gets a little bit more deep, but because of the way that animals are treated, I didn't stop eating meat initially because I was into like animal welfare. I actually now have a little bit more of that because I stopped eating meat. But what happens is that the animals are raised in such tight corners. A majority of their life, they are in a lot of fear. Mothers, like think about like cows, they get their babies taken away from them when they are born so that people could use the milk from the cows, and so that the baby doesn't drink up all of that milk. And so they have a lot of fear as they're being raised to essentially be slaughtered. And so, what happens once they get slaughtered? Actually, before they get slaughtered, they're getting pumped with antibiotics. I talked about this a little bit because there's just so many of them, they want to prevent infection. And sometimes they do get infected. And when they get infected, once they're slaughtered, they just cut that piece off and you get the rest of it. Talking about emotions at this time. And what happens is they've been in fear all of their lives. What happens? We eat this and we end up having fear within us. We already have a lot going on that causes us to have a lot of fear. Why continue to fight this, put this thing in our body, knowing that it's going to also uh, create fear within us and all the other emotions that it might have had? So we eat that as well, and we wonder why certain areas have higher crime and higher violence. I mean, it's complicated, yeah. There's a lot going on, but part of the reason is because of food. I mean, here in Chicago, if I drive out west, if I drive to the south side of Chicago, there are literally food deserts. And all you can find in the grocery stores are processed foods, and right then we're grilling meat and all of that. Really, what happens is we're not giving ourselves and our bodies what our bodies need. So we can't think properly. And we have all these emotions within us that cause us to act out. It's deep, but it's definitely worth mentioning. And I'm really, really glad that I can do that. I hope provides a little bit more insight into why sometimes there are all these uh, heightened emotions that come out. It has some to do with the foods that we eat or the foods that we don't eat. And we'll get into some of those a little bit later as well.